Hi guys. It's been a while since I've last posted anything on here, I really wanted to come back with some content quite back to back. I do promise that I'm going to try my best to organise my time a bit better so that I can put out more content. So today I wanted to talk about something that's I've been having a lot of conversations about this recently actually. So I thought, well, I may as well just make a video on it. So um, the thing is about the word Wicca and its origins, where it came from, and how it's evolved. There's a lot of discussion about whether it's an old concept, it's a new concept, it's a bit of both. And the popular narratives don't really help because they're not often, I will say, not necessarily always, but not often rooted in actual history. So I wanted to get back to the history of it all. Because I'm going to be talking about the word Wicca with two different spellings of the word, I've got little cards that I'll be holding up, so with the different spelling on, because they sound exactly identical, so you'll know exactly which one I'm talking about when I'm saying each one. So the first one that I'll be mentioning is, oh god, you can't even see it, that's not good. Wicca, I'll have to do this. Wicca and Wicca. They pronounce exactly the same, but one has two C's and one has one C. So, the word Wicca came to us through Old English or Anglo-Saxon. When the Saxons invaded Britain, they stumbled across a priesthood that they didn't have a name for. They tried to give everything names from their own regional culture, dialect, things like that. Their priesthood or a particular priesthood that they had was called the Volva, and the Volva, when the sort of the development of Anglo-Saxon came about in Britain, were called the Vala. So in Britain, these particular members of a priesthood, magical priesthood, were called Vala. But they found this group that were sort of similar to Vala. They were magical, definitely, but they were identical, they weren't the same, and there was enough distinction that they wanted to create a new word, so they came up with the word Wicca. So this word was a compound word, it was mashing two words together that already existed to create a new word. So they blended together a word that meant to have knowledge of effectively magical things with a Vitka, with the word wake. The word wake meant effectively it meant religious magic. So it was one who had knowledge of religious magic was Wicca. That's what they was trying to describe. It was sort of the boundary between religion and magic was very blurred with this particular priesthood. It was anywhere with old priesthoods, but there were this group in Britain that it was more pronounced, and they needed to create a word to describe it, and that word was Wicca. So when we get to, well, I'm jumping a little ahead and then I'll backpedal on it slightly, but when we hit the revival, we get the word witch, witchcraft, pretty much just that. But we also started to see the word Wicca and the word Wicca becoming more popular. So both of these originally, and I would also argue still, represent the names of the practitioners. The word Wicca in Middle English evolved into the word or the pronunciation Witcher, and then that ended up becoming our modern English word witch. So when people, I often sort of compare it with like how you people say like Wicca and witch are different things, they're not synonymous. And I almost think that that's like arguing that hello and bonjour have a different meaning, like they're not the same because the words are different, and just picking it apart based on something really minute. Old English to modern English, yes, they're different words, but ultimately they're the different words to describe the same words. The only major difference is the time period, that's it. And then regional dialects, because in North England, I grew up semi-rural, so in the rural and semi-rural areas you're going to hear Old English, Old Norse and Modern English spoke day to day. It's just part of our regional dialect. And we do have the word Wicca, and it's in our dialect. It's just there, and it does mean witch. A lot of the revivalist movement people were all from the Northwest, so a lot of North England dialect is just present within their interviews, both the things they wrote and the things they did for the TV, and then in their books, their published books. So, you have to almost take that into consideration. It's a living culture, and this word and this word have certain ties to each other, but they're not identical. They both exist within the exact same dialect. They are somewhat related, but they are also somewhat linguistically different, and they represent different things. So, Wicca, I would always just say is a synonym for witch, not for witchcraft, for witch. And that's just because it's part of my dialect, it's part of a living culture, and I don't think that we can rewrite culture based on, somebody outside of the culture wrote a book a long time ago and they used it differently, which I'm actually going to touch on that argument in a moment. But I also think that has to be the main thing when we're talking about regional areas. These are independent cultures, and things survive because we acknowledge that these are things that are tied to an area and to people. And I think when we and this is across the board, I'm making this statement, when we listen to the voices of people outside of a living culture, so that we elevate opinion over fact and over preservation of tradition, then we're almost on the losing argument, because you can't argue with people from within a culture on their culture if you don't understand it. And a lot of the discourse around these words comes from major misunderstanding, which is why I was saying earlier, it's not unanimously, not historically accurate, but a lot of the discussion isn't rooted in history. So when you get to the revival, you see both words in Joel Garden's book, his first book. He uses both, but he's using them in the context that I'm describing in this video. He uses Wicca when describing other people. He uses Wicca when describing himself or things that he does or people who follow his way of practice. So he's making a very clear distinction in the spelling and using something which, it's like almost like when you're learning at school, like things that sound alike but they're spelled different, like where, and where. These words sound similar, but they aren't the same, and it's about context. And if people don't understand linguistic nuance, that's sort of, I don't mean this in a really rude way, but if people aren't willing to educate themselves, then it's not for other people to pander to opinion. If you want to understand something that's so subtle, then ask people who speak the dialect, because it is a dialect term. That's where these words are pulled from. So very quickly, before I get on to this one in full and how it's evolved into this one, I want to mention this Wicca. very quickly. A lot of people said this word, yeah, Old English died out, Gerald Gardner brought it back. No, it's part of a regional dialect. And currently on my Instagram, I have a pinned post. It's like a white square. You click on it, you'll see the word Wicca highlighted. This is from a book. It's just a screenshot from a book. And it's a book that was published 30 years before Gerald Gardner was born. And it uses the word Wicca in the context I'm describing here as the name of the person, as the name of the practitioner, as a synonym for witch, without any explanation. It doesn't say Wicca means witch anywhere in there because it was understood. So, yeah, I think that's a big thing as well. We're told that he brought it back, and it isn't quite true. He's defined a lot of stuff, Gerald Gardner, and we have to acknowledge his place in history, but we also have to acknowledge that he didn't, the things he didn't create, we can't just give credit away and give culture away to being somebody's random invention in the 1950s. So Gerald Gardner, as I said earlier, used Wicca when describing himself or people who followed his teachings. So how did it evolve into Wicca? Well, really simple answer. A lot of our literature comes out of American publishers. So not necessarily always American authors, but American publication, definitely. And that's been for quite a long time now. So Dr. Leo Martello in America trademarked the word Wicca. And that left a lot of people caught between, can they use, when talking about history, they just didn't know, and there was caution, over caution. Can they use a word if it's been trademarked? Can it be published? Or are they going to be sued? So they just adopted Wicca to bypass a trademarking system in America, to bypass a trademark. And that is how we give credit to this Wicca with two C's, to something that was developed to just be spelled with one C in order to differentiate it from this spelling. They are related words, they both have ties to witch. This one has its linguistic origins, meaning to bend. We often hear this about the definition of the word Wicca, and they say it means to bend because the witch was bending something to their will. That's the interpretation that was given to this one because of its linguistic origins, meaning to bend. So Gerald Gardner really put his stamp on one word that wasn't being used by anyone because this one was already in popular use, and he wasn't wanting to say that he was doing something that he wasn't. He was carving out a new path, and I think we need to acknowledge that fact. And I don't think that we should allow ourselves, when we're seekers of true knowledge and we care about educating ourselves, we buy all the books in the world to try and understand ourselves, our history, our path, things like that. And I think if we get really caught up in pseudo history that was accidentally and inadvertently created because of a trademark that existed at one point in America, then I think we do a disservice to ourselves as seekers of truth and knowledge if we don't sort of go back to square one and double check our facts and make sure that we really understand what these things are before we get into what are often very heated discussions online over words that we probably aren't understanding ourselves. And I think the best thing is, before pointing the finger at somebody else and saying, you're wrong, you can't use that, or you're not a witch, you're a Wiccan because of this, which I will also say, when you add the N onto the end of either spelling, that is how you make it a plural. So telling a singular person that they are a Wiccan is to say that they are multiple people, which is an odd thing, because it's like saying if it's a synonym for witch, which it is, then it's like if I went to somebody, you're not a witch, you're witches, and you say it's just a daft argument, and we see this stuff all the time, and we see people make that same explanation, then normally follow it up with that, like the backhanded comment of educate yourself, and it's like, well, maybe you're the one that needs to educate yourself. But I don't think it's anybody's fault either, because, as I said, a lot of our literature comes out from America, so it's feeding back accidentally created pseudo history, because some people didn't want to get sued in the 60s, pretty much. So that's all I have to say. If there's any other words that people are interested in digging back into the history of and getting to the root of, particularly if they're very hotly debated, like, is it this or is it that, comment them in the description below. I think we've all seen the discourse on this sort of label policing, and I sort of think, as long as people are being respectful, I think just let people, define themselves. So yeah, that's my 2 cents. Which, wow, that's gone on for quite some time. So if you watched to the end, thank you very much, and I will speak to you again soon. Bye.